Our hearts are broken. My heart is broken. A senseless act of violence, unprecedented in our country, has occurred. I want to thank all of the people across Canada and across the world who have shared their expressions of grief, sorrow, support, and condolences as we mourn the loss of Constable Heidi Stevenson, as well as families across Nova Scotia and their loved ones. And we are all families. Heidi served in her community. Her children went to school in the community, as does Chad Morrison. In the face of this unprecedented crime, it's going to be very long and very complicated. It's not going to be gone through overnight. As the minister said, there's at least 15 crime scenes. But our focus must and will be to put names to the victims, to the heroes, to the people who serve their community. And again, on behalf of the RCMP family, I want to thank the minister, the media, and all the Canadians for such a tremendous support throughout this. And it means so much to us. I will end by saying Canadians are resilient. COVID showed us our resiliency. This event will again show our resiliency, and we will get through this. We'll get through this together. Thank you.
Today, all of the people of Canada join with the people of Nova Scotia in their grief for the senseless acts of violence that were committed in and around Portapique over the past weekend. I'd like to begin by expressing my deepest sympathies and the sympathies of all Canadians with the families and the loved ones of the deceased. And as we become more aware about the 18 innocent lives that were lost in this terrible tragedy, we will learn the full scope of this terrible crime and the devastating impact that it will have on communities and families in Nova Scotia and across Canada. A nurse, a teacher, correction officers, a serving police officer, parents, neighbors, and friends. The full scope of this tragedy and the 18 innocent lives that were lost will be remembered throughout Canada's history. One of the particularly tragic elements of this terrible event was the death of Constable Heidi Stevenson, who was killed answering the call to duty while bravely responding to this tragic incident. Constable Stevenson was a 23-year veteran of the RCMP, admired, respected, and beloved by her colleagues and her community. I also want to acknowledge Constable Chad Morrison, who is recovering today from gunshot wounds that he suffered in responding bravely to this event. I think all Canadians are grateful that we have people like Constable Stevenson, Constable Morrison, men and women serving in law enforcement across the country who answer the call, who rush towards the danger, who put their lives on the line. And it is important to remember that they are heroes every day, not just made heroes by this terrible tragedy, but every day for their service. And we will remember their sacrifice. The Nova Scotia RCMP are actively investigating almost 16 crime scenes, and they will be releasing information as it becomes available. I can tell you from experience that in these incredibly complex and tragic crimes, what is known now will be added to. The information will be incomplete. And the RCMP are doing an extraordinary job of tracking the evidence, getting the facts, dealing with families who are grieving an incredible loss. And they are dealing with all of that while they mourn the loss of a beloved colleague. Last night, I had this opportunity to speak with MPs from Nova Scotia who I serve with, Lenore Zahn, Darren Fisher, Bernadette Jordan. And I've asked them all to help us understand how the Government of Canada can best support their communities at this tragic time. And we will continue to work together to get through this. We will continue to support the RCMP in the important and vital work that they are doing to get Canadians the answers that they seek. I've also had the opportunity this morning to speak with Nova Scotia's Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Mark Furry. Mark and I used to work together when he was then serving with the RCMP, and he spoke about his recollection of Constable Stevenson. He was involved in her recruitment and hiring and training, and it was very apparent to me how deeply, emotionally, and impactful this tragedy has been for him as well. And so I would like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank the members of Nova Scotia's RCMP and the Commissioner who serve our communities every day. As Canadians, we have no greater responsibility than the safety of our communities and our kids. I'd also like to take this opportunity to express my heartfelt condolences to the people of Portapique, to the region of central Nova Scotia that has been so deeply impacted by the lives that have been stolen in this senseless act of violence.
Can you give us a sense of whether you're still looking at a possible order in Council to enact the promised ban on assault weapons?
Our government's been very clear in its commitment to strengthen gun control in Canada, and we have been working diligently on the best way to achieve the strengthening of both our regulations and the legislation pertaining to firearms and making Canada a safer place. But today, quite frankly, we focus on the grieving families of this terrible tragedy and provide support to the RCMP in the conduct of their investigation. We'll continue to do the work of Parliament, but today our focus really is on that support that is so necessary for the communities, for people who have lost loved ones, and from the RCMP who are doing very important work today.
A question that's been raised is about the fact that while there was information sent out on Twitter, there was no sort of public alert sent out through the telephone over the course of this incident. And I wonder if that's something that you're looking into now, if you have any questions about whether that might have helped preserve public safety.
I do say that in any incident such as this, we always have to look back at what we did. Nobody can lose their life in vain, and Heidi will not lose her life in vain, nor will the 17 other victims. We have to ensure that whatever happened there, if there's always going to be a better way to do things. And so if we can take this and move forward and find a better way to advise the public. But I have to say in these incidents, they are so dynamic and they are so quick. And it was just over 12 hours that all of this took place, and it was there was a lot of 15 different crime scenes, so you can imagine the dynamic nature of this. But again, we look at all the criminal side, and then of course we look at sort of the administrative side of all of that to say, what could we have done better to make Canadians safer? Because that is ultimately our goal.
Minister Blair, with respect to the victims and not to take away from them, I do want to return to gun control legislation. Following the attack in New Zealand last year, the New Zealand government was very swift in working to reduce the number of guns that they had in their communities, assault weapons. Likewise, Australia did the same thing following a mass shooting there in 1995, moved quite quickly. You've said it's still on the table, it's still on the agenda, but just exactly how and when is this going to be brought up, and in this new reduced COVID parliament that we have?
Yeah, there are a number of significant steps, and what we have previously indicated is our intention to strengthen gun control legislation. We intend to bring forward both regulation and legislation that will enable us to prohibit military-style assault weapons. We've also are working on new legislation that will strengthen gun storage rules to prevent the diversion of firearms into the hands of people that would commit crimes with them, and to reduce the incidence of smuggling of firearms across the border. We've also are intending to bring forward legislation to introduce what are sometimes referred to as red flag laws for individuals who represent a significant risk to themselves or to others, to ensure that they don't have access to firearms and to suspend temporarily their ability to acquire firearms. That work has been continuing. We are highly motivated by our commitment to keep Canadians safe. There have been far too many incidents of gun violence in our country, and we are working hard to make sure that we do put the measures in place that significantly reduce those incidents and keep people safe. Of course, we're deeply impacted by the terrible crimes that have taken place over the past 36 hours. But at the same time, I think it's very important to allow the RCMP to conduct their investigation, to gather the evidence and the facts. And our public policy should be evidence-based and will be evidence-based. And so we will support the RCMP in the conduct of their investigation. I think we've made it very clear our commitment to strengthen gun laws in this country, and we are working on doing that. The actual schedule for bringing forward that legislation, that is still to be determined, simply because we are in somewhat uncertain times in Parliament. But it doesn't in any way imply that we are any less committed to taking the steps that are necessary to keep Canadians safe, to strengthen our gun laws, and to do those things which Canadians expect of us and which are necessary to maintain safety and reduce gun violence in our communities.
I just want to ask, the suspect had a mock RCMP vehicle and was wearing RCMP paraphernalia. How does someone obtain this, put it together? Do we watch for this, and was he on our radar?
For that, he wasn't on our radar, as far as we know. But there's a lot of investigative steps that have already been followed to trace all of that back and how it did happen and how it could occur. Some of it, most of which we think is replica. It wasn't actually an RCMP vehicle, but it was made to look identical to one. And we will trace back every part of that vehicle to find out how that happened, as well as with the uniforms.